На трибунах аллеют знамена, облака в поднебесье плывут. На зеленом ковре стадиона разноцветные майки цветут.
Hello and welcome back to the Russian Football News Podcast. Apologies for a slight no-show last week as some very late emergencies came up and made recording in time for a Friday RPL games impossible. But we are back this week to discuss all the recent RPL action, including the last 2 game weeks. We're going to also cast over who Sochi and Rubin were drawn against in the Europa Conference League and look ahead at the next games. And lastly, discuss the Valery Karpin debacle, as he was originally given the Sbornaya job, agreeing to work with both Rostov and the national team, only to then leave his role as Rostov boss after 2 successive defeats, and subsequently was replaced by the local legend Yuri Semin. As we record, Spartak are currently playing against Benfica in their own Champions League qualifier, having literally just conceded a goal to go 1-0 down. So we'll probably leave Spartak aside this week due to the timing of the pod, and we will cover this game and the next leg in next week's pod. As usual, however, I am joined by David Sanson.
Good evening.
And Richard Pike.
Good evening, guys. How are we all?
I was good up until literally about 30 seconds ago, because as I've mentioned, I'm watching the Spartak game in one eye and recording a podcast in the other. So unfortunately, until Spartak's defence absolutely imploded and let Benfica just run through it like a knife through butter, I was good. But we will focus on the RPL matters this week as opposed to that Champions League qualifier. And I think we're going to start at the top of the table. So Richard first, Zenit, they're currently top with 6 from 6 and have been banging the goals in. And what have you made of their games so far, and how have they impressed you?
Yeah, they've continued on from what they've done last season. It's been, watching the highlights just back recently of the game against Himki. To be fair, in that game, I actually thought 3-1 flattered Zenit a little bit. I thought Himki played quite well, and they showed that in the second game week when they beat Krasnodar. So I thought that 3-1 victory for Zenit flattered them a little bit. But yeah, they looked, refreshing my memory of with the highlights recently. They looked a lot more convincing in the game against Rostov. It was a brilliant finish, 2 brilliant goals in the second half, especially both of them from Wendell, and then the fourth goal from Alexander Yelokin. Yelokin's finish was a lovely first-time hit, and Wendell's was also a beautiful shot, went into the top corner. Yeah, I'd say there's been a bit of a continuity from Zenit. They've carried on at the same kind of rate as what they did in the tail end of last season when they powered to the title. They've yet to be tested yet. Obviously, those are 2 games which I did expect them to win, Himki and Rostov. But yeah, they're looking pretty good still. Obviously, they've got Malcolm to come back from the Olympics with the Brazilian under 23s team. It's going to be interesting to see what they do in the market. I still think for the RPL, Zenit are obviously a very good side, and they should be favourites to win the league again. But obviously, we need to wait and see what they do now with the 2 potential foreign spots that they're going to have available. Because obviously, Sebastian Driussi have just departed to new Major League Soccer franchise Austin FC. So he's gone there. I think the fee was around €6 million or something like that, for what I've read on Transfermarkt. And the speculation about the future of Sardar Azmoun. So, Zenit, I'd still think need to add something more to their squad for Europe. But obviously, it's conditional upon, Azmoun leaving as well, as well as now Driussi, who has departed, because that then gives Zenit 2 transfers to see what they can do, because obviously beforehand they couldn't do anything because they were quoted up on the foreign limit. But yeah, I'd say so far it's been so good for Zenit, but obviously we can't make a full judgment on them because their squad is still very strong for RPL level, but we'll have to wait and see what happens later on in the season when they finally get a chance to bring in some fresh names. But yeah, so far it's been quite good. The second performance against Rostov definitely looked considerably improvement on the first game against Himki.
I must admit, I'm always, even though he did start life as a striker and has played most of his career in anywhere from central midfield to more attacking roles, I'm always surprised when Yerohin gets these sort of purple patches of just constantly scoring. I've seen the memes where it's like comparing him to Zuba in the way that he started this season. And I remember having this conversation late on last year. He just does this every now and again. And without disparaging him too much, I just feel like I'm always eternally surprised by when he does this. But if we do move down to second in the table, and who did spend a lot of the time actually at the top, David, you've got to be happy with how your boys Rubin have started so far.
Yeah, absolutely. Pre-season left me worried a little bit with some of our results towards the end of pre-season. We lost heavily against Spartak. Then 1 week later, we went and beat Spartak in the first game of the season. That was a tough one. We defended hard, having scored a very good goal early in the second half, and we rode our luck a little bit. Spartak missed good chances. We also put in some very good defending, so we ground that win out. And then last week we went away to Arsenal. Obviously, Arsenal were on some of the poorest form in the league, and it was a fairly comfortable 3-0 win. 3-0 even before half time. In the second half, Slutsky made some subs, rested some players for the European tie coming up, and just sat back a bit, and the score stayed there. So yeah, very, very promising start to the season. We're now at 32 points out of 39 in 2021, which is a more than respectable total, and a very good start to the season for us. Even with the loss of Starfelt, that loss, I wondered how that would affect us, but so far Begic and Uromovic have done a good job there in defence. There's rumours of us still maybe going in for another foreign defender, even though we've got our foreign quota hit still. Kvaratskhelia is still with us, and it's a big if. Isn't he going to go? So maybe we can do things to rectify the Starfelt loss. But very good start to the season.
Before we do move on from Rubin, of course, there's been in what many expected to be the replacement of Kvicha, but of course he is currently still at the club. How has Sead Haksabanovic adapted to life in Russia, and is Denis Makarov's impending move to Dinamo going to affect Rubin that much?
Well, Haksabanovic has not yet let the show alight. He started both games and played both games. He got an assist against Arsenal. Nothing special, a simple layoff, and then Kvicha banged one in from 20 yards. He is playing off the right where Makarov had played in the past. Him and Kvicha had actually swapped wings a couple of times, which is interesting. From a personal perspective, I think Makarov would need replacing, even with Haksabanovic. So obviously Haksabanovic was initially, we thought, the replacement for Kvicha. But now there's uncertainty as to whether Kvicha is going to go or not. There's actually rumours coming out now that maybe he is going to go again after earlier in the week us thinking he isn't. The Makarov deal, apparently, from Rubin's perspective, makes it harder for them to sell Kvicha, and they would need therefore a convincing offer. We'll see what happens with that. He's travelled with Rubin for the European side tomorrow, and I'm no doubt he'll play. But we still don't know. So the Makarov deal, whether it affects us long term or not, is interesting. I think a replacement's needed. If Kvicha goes, then a replacement's definitely needed. Another winger needs to come in. Rubin apparently are considering Makarov at his peak already, and therefore are cashing in while the offers are high. 10 million is a lot of money for a player who's only had 30 games in the top flight. So that's the perspective. Replacement needed. Haksabanovic still adapting. Not as direct, not as fast as Kvicha, for example, but seems to have a bit more of his wits about him. But because of the slightly different style of play, not necessarily in the same positions as where Kvicha will get to.
what I've seen of Haksabanovic so far is that he, like you mentioned there, that he doesn't quite have the directness of the other two, and I think that was one. I mean, you mentioned, Rubin have still won both games without Makarov having very big of a role, so I'll not over accentuate his impact. But I think he'd do very well under Sparta Dinamo. His directness would suit how Dinamo play, but I think one of Rubin's best attacking weapons of 2021 so far has been that sort of twin axis of Kvicha on one side, Makarov on the other, both being so incredibly direct, and in doing so, that really stops Despotovic being isolated up top and lets the defensive midfielders and the defense sort of rest a little bit more, at least in the middle of the park. So it would be interesting. I would like to see them personally replace them with quite a similar player who's very direct, very vertical, and comes in, cuts, and has a goal from far. But Kvicha's been doing that so far. So
Yeah,
if they can keep him, then
if Makarov goes, I'd like to replace him with Gajimuradov. Obviously, he's injured at the moment, but he's a similar style player to Makarov. If Kvicha goes, obviously that opens up another foreigner spot. Do we then consider that Haksabanovic is the replacement and we go elsewhere for another foreigner? Saito is still sat there, not registered for the league because he's our extra foreign player. We've been linked to a Tunisian defender today. Is that going to happen? It's all sort of very much up in the air with Rubin and their transfers at the moment. I think this next week we could see a bit of chopping and changing again.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. And if we do talk about chopping and change, we'll chop and change the subject to third in the table. And Richard, that is your own team that you follow quite a bit and keep an eye on for the site and for the pods, and that's Dinamo, who have also got 2 wins from 2 games this season. Is it fair to say that a lot of that's been fueled by a certain Arsene Zakarian, or is it maybe far more than meets the eye with Dinamo?
I actually thought in the second game, I caught a second game just recently against Ufa. I actually thought in the second game, other players stepped up to the plate alongside Zakarian. I thought Szymanski had a good game. Fomin took his 2 penalties quite well. I really like the way Chukavin is developing too. What was quite interesting in that game is that there was several times when he was dropping deep, and then there were 2 players sometimes running past him, and he was dropping deep, shielding the ball, turning the player who he'd shielded the ball from, and then picking a pass to the wings for people running into space. So I really like the way Chukavin's developing, and it is good to see some variety in Russian strikers developing. Russia obviously produces a lot of Artem Zhuba and Alexander Sobolev style strikers, your big target man strikers. So it's nice to see different types of striker now starting to emerge in Russia. Chukavin is one of those, and he's coming along nicely. Obviously needs to add a few more goals to his game, but I think that will come. It's easy to remember he is only 19 years of age. But yeah, I think Dinamo, more players stepped up in attack in that game against Ufa. It got a little bit hairy towards the end, with those 2 Gamid Agalarov goals. And I was happy for him because I remember when he first broke on the scene at Anji, I remember in one of the articles for RFN, I remember David pointing him out from the Granatkin Memorial Tournament where he impressed as a youngster. And it's obviously he's probably not quite pushed on since then, but it was nice to see him score those 2 goals. And hopefully now under Stukalov at Ufa, he can develop another young Russian striker. But yeah, Dinamo, it was nice to see as well Skopintsev come on as an impact sub at the end there. And with Laxalt now being the left back full time, I get the impression now they're going to use Skopintsev as an impact sub on the left wing. That's, I think, now where they see his position. And it was his ball in that I think he was aiming for Chukavin for that winning goal, but I think he missed it. But obviously Szymanski didn't and took his chance. And Dinamo not brilliant in that game, but they got the job done. In past years, Rostov and Ufa away from home. It's worth remembering both these games were away from home. In past years, that would have been probably Dinamo probably wouldn't have won both those games. They might even have lost them both or drawn 1, lost 1. So the fact that they've got 2 wins on the board, despite still probably having a bit more to offer, and defensively could tighten up a little bit too. The second goal, it was a poor defensive mistake by Fabian Balbuena. He failed to clear his lines, and that allowed Ufa to get the ball in the box to score. But yeah, it's just encouraging to see Dinamo still have more in the tank to offer, and yet they've got 2 wins on the board, so there's still some improvement to come. First real test of the season so far this weekend against CSKA. I'm looking forward to seeing that game, and it is at Dinamo. So yeah, I mean, there's that game and then Akhmat away. They're 2 tough fixtures. If Dinamo can come through that with another 4 points or so, I think it's looking good so far. But yeah, I think others stepped up to the plate rather than Zakayan at the weekend. Zakayan was still decent at the weekend, but I thought others stepped up to the plate really well too. So that was good to see. And the Makarov addition could be quite interesting. It'd be interesting to see where he would fit in if that proposed deal does come through. It certainly gives Dinamo a lot of options in behind Chukavin. You've got NG, you've got Lezovoy, Makarov, Szymanski. Grulyov is still there even. You've tons of options there. So yeah, be interesting to see what happens. But yeah, it's looking good so far. But yeah, this weekend will be the first real test, you'd think. But so far, so good.
Yeah, certainly. And of course, this weekend for those, as a little quick reminder, Richard mentioned it, but it is, of course, Dinamo versus CSKA in the next Moscow derby. CSKA, who have had a mixed start of late, but we will mention both CSKA and Lokomotiv in future episodes because we're focusing on some. I feel like, especially with Lokomotiv, there's going to be quite a lot happening coming up with the restructuring of Ralf Ragnick and Thomas Zorn taking over the sporting positions in the club at the board. So we'll hold the space for Loco in particular right now, and we'll actually be skipping a little bit further down the table and back to David, and actually near the bottom, because I must admit I've been a little bit disappointed by Krylia so far, David.
Yeah, opening week against Akhmat, first 20 minutes they barely were on the pitch. I don't know whether that's because they weren't good or whether because Akhmat were very good. Probably a bit of both. One player who was really struggling both matches is the left back Yuri Gorshkov. He needs new boots, but he constantly seems to be slipping over, but has really struggled position. Yeah, he's a very attack-minded player. He can also play in centre mid, but when he plays at left back, he likes to get forward a lot, and he's been caught out a few times. I noticed in both the fixtures against Akhmat and then against Spartak last week. We had a lot of hope for this team. It's a young team. A lot of, I think there's 12 or 13 former Chertanova players in there now, coached by a former Chertanova coach. So there was hope that, this team this is a good unit, that they'd be used to playing with each other and they could bring their, high goal scoring style to the Premier League. But so far it's just not clicked. They were better against Spartak. Kept it at 1-0. A penalty, which again I thought was a little bit harsh for a handball. And then we finally saw, I suppose, the one highlight that a lot of people have been talking about in Russia is the debut of Sergei Penyaev. He finally got his debut for Krylia against Spartak. Came on for 15 minutes. And he's only 16 years old, and he gave. If Ayrton had a bit less pace, then he really was gonna give him a hard time. He gave him a hard time regardless. The mini 15-minute highlight package that Penyaev had. I think it was Nobolito was commentating, and he was getting very excited every time Penyaev skinned Ayrton, which was about 3 times in 15 minutes. He skinned him, but Ayrton's recovery pace is very good to the point where it didn't really come to fruition on a couple of occasions. So yeah, Sergeyev's not really hit the ground running. He was very, very unfortunate against Akhmat. He hit the post in the 93rd minute from about 25 yards, which would have, obviously equalised the game, tied the game up. But yet to score his first goal in the Premier League. Yet to get things going, and maybe this week they've got to go to Arsenal, who are on a big losing streak over this season and the end of last season. I think they've lost 5 in a row. That's a game where, we'd expect Krylia should be able to do something. They've looked okay. We saw them at the end of last season in the Cup, beating Russian Premier League teams for fun. And they did fairly well in the Cup final against Loco. So maybe this will be the turning point for them. And a game, I know, granted it's away, but a game against Arsenal is as good a chance as any to turn it around.
Yeah, and I think with Krylia, it's worth just taking early results with a pinch of salt, because we all know they have a talented team in terms of pure technical ability, but it is very much a young side. The average age so far has been edging around the 25 mark, which is among the lowest in the RPL. There's a lot of young players who are making their full debuts in the RPL, and it mustn't be stated that from a mental point of view, and particularly a defensive point of view, there's quite a big step up from the Finetl to RPL. And you highlighted Gorshkov there, and I wouldn't be surprised if his struggles did continue for a little while until he started adapting better defensively, because, as you said, he's not a particularly strong defensive fullback. But if I do stay down the bottom of the table and go from a team who have perhaps been unlucky but also performing quite poorly to a side who have been performing horrendously for some time now, they've lost 9 out of the last 10 games, 6 on the bounce in the RPL. And the only one that they did win was a 1-0 victory in a club-friendly game against Karabag. And that is, of course, Arsenal Tula. And just quickly before I hand over to yourself, Richard, I think if you do look through Arsenal's team, and the team at the weekend was Shamov, and then Smolnikov, Novoseltsev, Burlak and Stepanov, Tukachov, Kostadinov, Chausic, Zariko, Davitashvili, and then Yevgeny Markov and Yevgeny Lutsenko, the pair of Yevgenys up top. Now, obviously, there's a lot of power in that team, especially with Lutsenko up top. But that's just... And with Pyotr Fionov in charge, who's, in my opinion, the worst manager in Russia, that's really poor and a massive step down from where they had in recent seasons. And even in seasons in which they have actually relatively struggled. Last year they did. So, Richard, are you worried for them early doors, just with their long-term lack of form?
I think you have to be, really, don't you? I mean, they only just survived last season too. I remember Rostov really late on in that final game against Rubin having a chance, and it literally whiskered just over the bar. And had that gone in, and obviously the UFA versus Arsenal Tula game later on that same day was delayed, obviously. So, but had that gone in, then Arsenal would have had to have won their final game against UFA to survive, and they weren't winning that game because UFA were all over them. It's really, really worrying for them. Yeah, 2 games where they've suffered quite heavy defeats, and that game against Krylia this weekend is already looking like potentially decisive. If both those sides have lost their opening 2 games, and if either of them lose it, they're going to be in big trouble. And I really worry for Arsenal, Tula. I really do, because it's not just that. They've had a lot of change in the squad recently too. I mean, I've just got their transfers up now, and there's just so many players who've left them, like who've been stalwarts in recent years. Gia Grigolava's left, Maxim Belyaev, Robert Bauer, Kirill Kombarov has retired. They've lost a lot of players, and obviously there's been a lot of turnover with transfers. And just having a look now at how many transfers they've brought in. They've brought in, I think it's 9 transfers this summer. 8 of them frees, and Bjornström, the left back from Sweden, who they brought in for €200,000. So that is a lot of turnover, and a lot of experience is left. So I think it's going to be very, very difficult for them. And yeah, like you said, James, they've been on a downer for a while now. They finished last season poorly. I'm like you too. I don't particularly rate Dmitry Parfyonov as a manager. I was saying it on a number of occasions last season. And yeah, I think they're in real trouble, judging from what I've seen so far. And that game at the weekend it's absolutely massive. I think it's probably more important for Arsenal Tula to win it than Krylia, because given as you just said with David, given Krylia have been winning games against RPL teams in the cup last season, you think Krylia might eventually come to, and start coming good, getting some results. But Arsenal Tula, this is a slide which they really need to address, and with a huge turnover of players, and a manager I don't particularly rate, I've got to admit I'm thinking already that they're a decent shout for relegation. It's going to be a big ship to turn around from Parfionov, and I'm not massively convinced based on the results so far.
Certainly, it just reeks of absolute instability in a club that's not really being steered in the correct direction from the sporting level. Obviously, we've given, take Rubin, for example, we've given Leonid Slutsky a hell of a lot of credit for the way he's turned around that squad. But from a level above that, their sporting directors, their board, they seem to really know how to steer a club in the right way, both in terms of financially and on the pitch. Just having a quick look at some of the new signings who have actually started in the last game for Arsenal. Igor Smolnikov, poor last season for Krasnodar for the most part, wrong end of 30. Somehow Novoselytsev's still only 29. It feels like he's been just wandering around doing absolutely nothing but posting Instagram photos since about 2012. And then some of the others just reek of just players who were just available and just kind of just grabbing at thin air and hoping for the best. Zariko, there could be a player in there. He's still got time. He's still only young. But he was awful for Rota last season, and he's carried that form on now. And I just really don't see Parfionov having the wherewithal and managerial ability to get this sort of disparate group of players together and get them on the right track. But it is very early doors, so they've got nothing but time, and the transfer window, of course, isn't closed yet if they can get some money together and build upon that squad. But if we move a little bit further up the table next, David, there's a little bit of a surprise package sitting just outside the top four in Nizhny Novgorod.
Nizhny Novgorod, they're not doing too bad at all. They picked up a 1-1 draw away at Ural this weekend. 9 minutes of injury time, by the way, at the end of that one, because the floodlights went out with about 10 minutes to go. And considering the game was being played afternoon in the UK, it was about 8 o'clock in Yekaterinburg, so it was getting fairly dark over there, and they needed the lights back on. But erratically, it was an Ural dominant performance possession wise. They weren't exactly having bunches of chances. Panyukov scored a nice goal, but Nizhny through Timur Suleimanov, who we followed and talked about a couple of times on the pod last year in the FNL. Got his first goal in the top flight, having signed for Nizhny permanently over the summer from a set play. Him and Gotsuk were big threats in the air last year, and I think that's going to be the case again this year. First week, Suleimanov again, both times he'd come off the bench, he was involved against Sochi. They picked up a fairly impressive win at home against Sochi, who were lackluster. I think we maybe could put it down to the European games being on their mind that they were playing. But Suleimanov came on, and with, I think, literally his first touch. Was it his first touch in that game? But anyway, it was Gorbanov and Suleimanov combined, and one of the two, it was this first touch. Suleimanov stuck Gorbanov through and goal, and he scored. The squad's still very thin. I think they've only named 6 subs on both occasions, so they definitely need some bodies in there. They've been linked to some players here and there. There was talk pre-season that they were, hadn't secured major funding, so they haven't brought in too much. I'm hoping they'll sort of potentially go back and get Krivtsov, who's still sort of lingering in limbo. He's been with Krasnodar and Nizhny in pre-season, and wherever he goes, if he can go to Nizhny, then Kozhikov will give him some game time. But solid start from them. They'll take 4 points out of 6 in the first 2 weeks. First big challenge this week is away at Spartak, though, so we'll see what they're made of, how well they can set up defensively against them. I must say, Gotsuk and the other defender were not particularly great for the goal that Ural scored. So with some flashier movement, when Zenit come to town, I would still expect Zenit to roundly give them a thumping, even though Zuba's not scoring or assisting at the moment. But good start at the very least, but still things to do. Still work need doing in Nizhny. Bodies need to come in, and it will be a long season for them.
Yeah, it will be. I expected them, to be honest, to be a little bit like this season's Rotter, where I thought they would have been quite solid defensively, but not necessarily very exciting in attack. I had worries over the similar worries to Krylia, basically, and any other promoted side about how some of the younger players and Fener regulars can adapt to RPL football. But hey, it seems like Kurzhakov Ball's getting off to a good start there, and he's carrying on some of his good management from Tom Tomsk last season. But from this season's so far 2 games in surprise package to last season's 30 games total season surprise package, Richard's Sochi start's been a little bit mixed, but understandable, I would think, with the European commitments this early as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's the funny thing about Sochi is that they lost the game I expected them to win against Nizhny, and then they won the game I expected them to lose against Atmat, because obviously both games were sandwiched in between the Europa Conference League 2-legged victory over FK Keshla from Azerbaijan. I watched the game against Nizhny, and I've got to say, yeah, I think fatigue probably played an impact on that. I mean, they hadn't had to do any travelling for that game because it was after the home match. So they weren't coming back from somewhere and then playing on a 3-day turnaround. Yeah, they looked surprisingly quite flat in that game. I mean, it could have been different early doors. I mean, I remember Christian Naboa having a free kick, and I think he curled it over the wall, but then Nigmatulin, Nizhny's goalkeeper, pulled off an absolutely fantastic save. And I thought it had hit the bar at first, but I think he just got a little touch onto it and touched it onto the bar, and it come crashing down off the bar. So who knows? I mean, if that had gone in, then it is a different game. And then, yeah, I think maybe they possibly underestimated Nizhny a little bit, which, probably contributed towards the sluggish performance. Maybe it was, coming off the back of a European game. But it was a good win for them against Atmat. I was looking at the highlights of that earlier, and that is a good scout, because Atmat away is always quite a difficult place for teams to go, and that they got the 3 points. It looked like it was a nice deserved win for them. They're probably still looking at a few bodies. Obviously, they let Ivan Mladenovic go to Nizhny. I mean, I guess they've got, it's an interesting one, that, because obviously last season he was, a regular for them in defence, but obviously now they've upgraded their defence quite a lot with the signings of Barac, Rodrigo and Mamama, back for another season on loan, so they can dispense of Mladenovic. But yeah, I think this upcoming Europa Conference League match will be key for Sochi. I still think they need bodies in. I still think not massive amounts, but probably you'll be looking at another 3 or 4, maybe ideally coming in. I think they've got one foreign spot free, and with Mladenovic now going. So, yeah. I mean, they're going to have to bring in a few more, but I think what might condition that is their upcoming Europa Conference League game. We'll get onto that in a bit. Might condition whether they bring in the bodies now or bring in the bodies later in the season. But yeah, they're probably still missing a few players. But a decent start. It's to be expected. A little bit of a mixed start after in the middle of Conference League qualifying. It's to be expected, but it's not a total disaster. It's not like if they'd have lost 2 games, then you might have worried a little bit. But they've done okay. So. Won the game that they lost. Won the game I expected them to lose, but lost the game I expected them to win. But yeah, I think Sochi will be fine. So I think they'll be fine.
Certainly. It's quite ironic that, of course, 2 weeks ago we didn't really read the riot act, but we certainly did play down the potential impact of Marko Djganjic, and then goes to 2 games later and scores the winner against Akhmat. So what do we know, eh? But at least Christian Naboa has been continuing his excellent form. I think he's been their best player this season by quite some distance, continuing being the best player for them last season by also quite some distance. So I wonder what sort of effect in the longer term Naboa's potential retirement could have on Sochi, because he is 36 now. But as he mentioned in an interview with ourselves last year, that he feels fit and healthy, and he's actually considering himself to be among the best form in his career, which is great to read, because he's been absolutely brilliant for them. And we will finish off our little RPL discussion here. And unfortunately, we won't be able to cover all the sides, so we will try and jump into some of the ones that we haven't mentioned this week in the next pod. But David, I'm going to leave you to discuss a team that you did briefly mention earlier, and that's Ural Ekaterinburg, who have got a quite promising group of youngsters right now, but are maybe not starting quite as well as we could have hoped.
Yeah, I think Ural, there's definitely a change in mindset there. You look at their transfers this summer, and it's predominantly younger players who they've bought in, as we've seen in the past, and just take a look at the squad there. It had been over the last couple of years a very old squad, and there's still some uninspiring lineup decisions going on from the manager. I forget his name, the ex-Krasnodar guy, Matveyev. That's the one. But the squad in general, there's finally a young core there of players who ideally can be developed. Eric Bigfalvey, we talked about off air beforehand, and he's not the same player he once was. Him and Panyukov starting as the striker, and with Bigfalvey behind in attacking midfield are a lackluster duo. There's no dynamism there at all, no movement. It would rely heavily on the wingers. Obviously, they're without El Kabir, who was one of the big explosive wingers that they had over the last few years. Gajin Radov, who would presumably be starting, is currently injured. So they say they limp to that draw against Nizhny over the weekend. Were on top. Nizhny only had minimal chances. Ural had a lot of the ball, but very few actual chances. Other than what they scored. First week around, they were fairly unlucky to lose so heavily against Krasnodar. They started well. They missed a penalty before half time. Terrible penalty it was from Bigfalvey, which would have put them 1-0 up. And then Krasnodar opened the scoring with a deflected shot from 25 yards, completely wrong-footed. The goalkeeper, no chance. Then Volenya comes in and scores another long shot, not deflected, to make it 2-0 later on. And then they get a penalty in the last minute from a dive from John, whatever it was. It was a dive. I don't know how VAR hasn't overturned that particular one. So that they've been a little hard done by, but say there's a young core there of players who are looking like, there could be some promise from them this season. We got Luka Gagnidze there on loan from Dinamo. He made his debut over the weekend. Kolesnichenko, who started the first week. Arsen Adamov, who's a regular now in the team. Gajin Muradov, Maximenko, who both moved up from the FNL last year. Ageyev, who joined from Lokomotiv in the summer as a striker. And this week we had Yuri Zhelezhnov, I don't know how to quite pronounce it. 18-year-old winger who last year was playing in the PFL and the Youth Football League as well for Saturn, who, as we know, are a fairly reputable academy. And he got his debut. He'd been starting and playing a lot in pre-season, and he got his debut this weekend against Nizhny, and he was okay. Nothing too special going on, but he's 18 years old. It's his first senior appearance in the Premier League, so we're a lot off. So yeah, there's potential there. I think they're one or two signings away from being competitive again in the mid-table. If they could just get in a better striker and not rely so heavily on Bigfalvey, there's something there. I think in the squad. But so far not quite clicking for them.
Yeah, a little comment that you made last week caused a little bit of a uproar from a certain Andrew Flint in the group chat that Bigfalvey's been out of form for quite some time now, and I totally agree. I think he's been a shadow of his former self for the last 18 months or so.
Yeah. I mean, he has. Obviously, he is 34 now. He essentially seemed to join Ural at his peak. And there was a time where he's never been dynamic. He's never been the player who's going to dribble with the ball, but he's emphatic. He can score for fun from anywhere. He's just that kind of guy. But it just seems to me a little bit that the legs are gone and that Ural are still being over reliant on him when they need to start playing more as a team.
Yeah, certainly. There's a lot of good possession football and build up there, but not necessarily everything in the final third. And that's basically been Ural's same problem for probably about 40 years now. But if we do skip on from the RPL, and we'll just finish off with a couple of shorter topics. Firstly, as I mentioned at the top of the show, the UEFA Europa Conference League, yep, that's a mouthful, draw took place. In the next round, of course, before the draw, Rubin Kazan will be taking on Rakov and Sochi against Partizan Belgrade. So, David, what do you expect from Rubin in this round and in the next draw against two teams that I can't remember who they're going to play?
Well, if they can get past Rakov, who I don't know much about, but they came second in the league last year. They struggled over two legs against Sbornaya, 0-0 over 180 minutes plus injury time. Only went through on penalties, and have seemingly started the league struggling as well this season. When you compare that to how Rubin have started this season and how their youth perform has been in 2021, it seems like Rubin should be okay with this. They got the away leg first. Obviously, away goals not counting, but going away from home is obviously still the harder of the two fixtures on paper. So if Rubin can go away and come away with a 1 or 2-0 victory, then you'd feel confident they can get through. Then it'll be against RFS of Latvia or Ghent of Belgium. Be interesting that Ghent. I think I was getting when the draw came out. I was remembering the Ghent of old, and not the Ghent of now, who have a leading striker who is an ex-RPL striker, by the way. You may remember Gianni Bruno, potentially not, from his very brief spell, maybe a year, maybe half a year at Krylia Sovetov. I had a look at the squad, and I was then slightly reassured. I thought, actually, this if Rubin were to get Ghent, if Ghent are able to beat RFS from Latvia, I felt like Rubin could be competitive against Ghent by the look of it based on the squad. I don't know form-wise how they are. So I think I was maybe confusing them originally with the Ghent of old or Genk, who I think are a lot better. So yeah, that's an interesting tie, and if Rubin can beat Rakov, I think there's a good chance for them. It's not like Spartak against Benfica where you're thinking, oh god, that's a tough tie. It's Rubin against Ghent potentially, which is like, well, that's that could go either way. Maybe it's potentially winnable. So I'm hopeful. Obviously, I'd love to get Rubin in Europe. We all would like to get Rubin in the group stages. So fingers crossed.
And Richard, how about Sochi? Do you think they've got enough to get past Partizan and then potentially the game after that?
Just following on Sochi, just a couple of extra little things on Rubin. I was speaking as well to one of my friends last night who, watched a little bit of Polish football. He's based out there. And Rakov apparently lost Kamil Piakowski, who's one of their best players. He got sold to RB Salzburg in the summer. So that's a blow for them. And yeah, I heard from him as well that they've not started the season very well. So I think that does look quite a nice winnable. That looks like a winnable tie for Rubin, certainly. Definitely got a good chance of going through with that. And interestingly, one last little thing looking ahead for against Sochi too. Apparently Ghent have just recently sold Roman Yaremchuk, who obviously played for Ukraine at Euro 2020. He recently was sold to Benfica. So that deal literally went through, I think, in the last few days. So obviously Ghent have lost him, and he scored a lot of goals for them last season. I think just looking now, he scored 20 goals in 34 games for them last season in the league, according to the stats I've got in front of me. So yeah, Rubin's path looks quite decent actually now. Obviously, I'm not underestimating any team, as we all know, based on the Russian club's performances recently. But Rubin, if they can get through against Rakov, I certainly think they have a chance of making the group stage. As for Sochi, I was a little bit worried when I saw them draw Partizan after getting through against Keshler. However, last night, obviously, Partizan came second in the Serbian league last year to Red Star Belgrade, who went a whole season unbeaten. But I was seeing the scores last night on the Champions League qualifier that Red Star played, and they actually played Sheriff Tiraspol from Moldova, and it was at the Ratko Milic, the Maracana Stadium in Belgrade. It was actually Red Star's home game, and I was expecting them to beat Sheriff pretty easily at home, but they only got a 1-1 draw. So it's given me a little bit more hope going in, because obviously Partizan probably not as strong as Red Star, so it's given me a little bit of hope for Sochi there. First leg's massive. They've got to win that game at home, take advantage of being at home in the first leg, and ideally take a lead to Belgrade. I don't know what the situation is like in Serbia at the minute, whether they're going to have crowds at the stadiums there. I don't know whether it's half capacity, full capacity, partial capacity, no capacity, because obviously it's an intimidating atmosphere whenever you go to Greece, Turkey, Serbia for a match away from home in Europe. So because the atmosphere is quite vociferous in the stadium, it's quite hostile atmosphere for visiting teams. So if it's not many in the stadium allowed, I don't know, then that might work to Sochi's advantage. It is still going to be a tough tie though, but I think Sochi have a chance, but they've got to take something to Belgrade with them from this home game. And then if they get through, they either play I think they play either Santa Clara of the Azores of Portugal or Olimpia Ljubljana of Slovenia. Olimpia Ljubljana only just scraped through against Birkirkara from Malta in the last round. So I would expect Santa Clara to beat them. That could be quite tough for Sochi, because obviously I think they came 5th or 6th in the Portuguese league last season. And it's hell of a trip for both sides. We're talking 3,000 kilometres. The Azores are like, about 1,000, 1,500 kilometres away, 1,000 kilometres plus away from the Portuguese mainland. So that could be quite interesting. But yeah, Sochi have got to try and take advantage of that home tie against Partizan first up. It's going to be tough, but I think they have a chance. But they have to take something to Belgrade. Absolutely have to take something to Belgrade to have a chance.
Yeah, without a shadow of a doubt, it's arguably one of the most difficult away games in Europe when that place really gets rocking. Both stadiums in Belgrade are pretty horrendous places to go to. So hopefully Sochi can get a good result at home and move on from there, because I think, to be honest, Partizan is a more daunting opposition than any of the other sides. RSF, RFS, whatever the fuck they're called, the Latvian team, Ghent, Santa Clara, and Olimpia Ljubljana are nowhere near as experienced in this competition as Partizan. And Partizan, that game really smacks of the Neftchi Baku game against Arsenal, was it a couple of years ago, where Neftchi Baku were arguably at the time along similar quality levels to Arsenal, but Arsenal, complete lack of inexperience at that level really showed. But if we skip on from any European and domestic matters and focus a little bit on the managerial scene. Now, of course, as I mentioned at the top of the pod, Valery Karpin last week was announced as the new Russia boss in a short-term capacity. Originally, it was announced that he would be taking over duties of both the Russia national team and Rostov, in a similar deal to that of Leonid Slutsky, in which he managed the national side and CSKA Moscow at the same time. Now, after Rostov's second loss from 2 games so far this season, firstly in the opening match 2-0 against Dinamo, and then the 4-2 against Zenit, it was announced that Valery Karpin had left by mutual consent, part resigned, part pushed. Though, to be honest, more often than not, when you read mutual consent, it's more of a sacking in which the manager's blushes a spade, to put it in a nicer way. Since then, local legendary boss Yuri Semin has taken over, and that was confirmed just today, I believe, was it? So, first of all, David, what are your thoughts on firstly Karpin at Sbornaya, and secondly Semin at Rostov?
Well, look, Karpin should have left Rostov before the summer, honestly. They've wasted a whole summer and then decided after 2 games this still isn't working. They've only won 3 times in 2021. and they were predictably against Rostov, Tambov, and Arsenal. So when you can only be competitive against the three worst teams, that's not good. I'm intrigued as to how Karpin's going to do at the national team. We know he's got a slight pedigree of preferring younger players, and that's what we've been calling out for a long time for at the national team level. So I'll be very interested to see what his first squad's going to be. You know, which new players are going to get their first call ups. You know, we're going to see debuts. Is Zakharyan going to be involved? There's rumours that Zakharyan, Tukavin, Tiknisian, Zinkovsky are all on the shortlist to be called up. So I'm intrigued as to who, from that perspective, you know, to see more young Russian players getting in the national team. That intrigues me. With regards to results on the pitch, we've seen Karpin have very good spells at club level. We've also seen him have very bad spells at club level. So I'm in between on that respect. There's before the end of the year, there's 2 games. I think both 2 Croatia games, I want to say. Well, there's certainly a Croatia game in the next 3, as well as a game against Malta and Cyprus, I want to say. So there's a couple of tough fixtures in there. And I suppose it'll just be a case of waiting and seeing. I think it could go either way. It could be a streak of genius, and he could really get this new generation going on the senior level, or it will just fall flat, and there'll be no real change. I think obviously everyone's waiting with bated breath to see if he's going to call up Zuba after their previous disagreements. 10 years ago, however long it was. So that's that side. Semin at Rostov, Rostov squad built by Karpin is naturally, as I say, quite young. Semin is an old style manager. It will be interesting to see what he does. We've got to give him some credit from his time at Loka, where he brought through the Miranchuk twins for starters. We know he can grind out results. For a team like Rostov, who sort of pride themselves on their relative youth and their sort of outreach, you would have liked to see them maybe try something a bit different, maybe go foreign. Semin is very old as well, naturally, 75. It's an uninspiring appointment. I saw Cherchesov linked, and I thought, that's such a Rostov thing to do. You could totally see Rostov doing that. And then the next day, Semin was in, and was like, oh yeah, that's also a fairly Rostov thing to do. I think I'm more excited on the Karpin side at Sbornaya rather than Semin at Rostov. But Rostov definitely needs something, because they've been essentially terrible this whole year, and the squad is not that bad. The squad's better than that. They needed something doing, and hopefully he can turn it around for them.
Yeah, the squad's certainly greater than a lot of the other sides down there who are on 0 points so far this part of the season. But firstly, for myself and Karpin at Russia, Karpin does have a track record of bringing through some younger players, which, like you said, is slightly promising. We've been calling for that for some time, so it would be a little hypocritical now to not necessarily support a manager who does bring in younger players in the national team position. My worries are different to that. My worries are that, look, he's a man who is very much a transfer window manager. He has been throughout his entire career. His solution to solving problems at Rostov was buying in the summer and then using that as an impetus to do well in the first half of the season before tailing off in the second. And that's happened every summer now. He does go through quite a lot of rebuilding spates. He can't do that with Russia. But at the same time, on the other hand, he's got nothing to lose. I mean, Russia are in a pretty low position right now anyway. It's pretty generally accepted across the public and journalists in the nation that they want to rebuild, they want to see fresher faces. So even though he's only in a short-term deal, all he literally has to do is get them playing good football, get the odd result here or there, and introduce younger players, and he's already going to be held in higher esteem. It is all just a bit bizarre. He's not. Usually, you want a manager going into a national team on the back of success. Karpin has had mixed success at times, but every single mixed success has been wrought with inconsistency because of the inconsistencies of Rostov themselves under Karpin. Richard, what are your thoughts on Karpin? And lastly, briefly on Semin and taking over at Rostov as well?
Yeah, I'd like to echo those thoughts about being a transfer window manager, James. That's a little bit of a worry for me too, because yes, the national team needs a freshen up at the moment with some fresh young talent after Stanny's lack of willingness to actually integrate young players until it was too late. However, you've also got to have some element of continuity too. I'm just a bit worried with Karpin that this penchant to keep going into windows and buying more players and having rebuild after rebuild. Is he going to? Are too many players going to get called up? I think some consistency with squad selection and keeping a consistent team is important. If you're going to do like the rebuild, right, do it at the start and then give that team a batch and a run of form. A run of games, and then see what happens before you then start bringing in loads of new players left, right, and centre. Yeah, that to me could be an issue with Karpin. And also, what's also quite noteworthy too is that he seems to be a manager too who, like you said, results do tend to tail off after a while with him. He seems to have a good start, and then come about the third season at every club he's been at, the results seem to tail off. Sometimes they tail off at the end of the season, like you said. I'm a bit like David. Yeah, this could go either way. With Karpin, I'm sort of a bit on the fence with it. Obviously, yes, I do have my reservations about it. And the short-term contract, I honestly have a funny feeling that this is a contract till the World Cup, end of World Cup qualifiers in 2022. And there was a lot of talk before it was announced that Karpin got the job that Russia might go foreign again. And I'm beginning to wonder, is this a last trial of a Russian manager before the Russian Football Union might consider a foreign manager again? Because Stefan Kuntz from Germany's under 21s was heavily being considered. I did notice those rumours. There was talk of Joachim Low. I don't know how much truth there was in that, but there was definitely talk of a foreign manager coming in. So I'm beginning to wonder if Karpin represents, a steady hand, but also somebody who, is potentially, a try them, and then if it doesn't work out, then go foreign kind of option for the Russian Football Union. So it'd be interesting to see how it works out. And yeah, he was totally right to leave Rostov, like David said. He should have left in the summer, really. It was starting to go a bit stale there, and then trying to take on two jobs at once, just not a good idea. Whenever that's been tried before in the past, it's just not worked. I remember Kevin Keegan briefly doing it once with England and Fulham. It didn't really work out. He had to quit Fulham to take England full time. So yeah, it was the right thing to step down from Rostov. I'm not massively enthusiastic about Semin, I have to be honest with you. I'm very surprised that he's come back. He's 75 next May, and it is worth remembering too that whilst he is a legendary figure in Russian football, a lot of his success in Russia has just come at the one club, at Lokomotiv. He didn't last very long at Dinamo, didn't last very long at Anzhi. So that will be a bit of a concern to me as well. I think Rostov too are in a bit of a period now where they're coming down. I think it's important to remember with Rostov, they've been overachieving for the last 5 years, with that second place finish in 2016, with a fifth place finish 2 seasons ago. They have been overachieving. At the moment, you'd say at best their squad's about mid-table. The likes of Dinamo, Rubin, Sochi seem to have powered past them in the pecking order. So, and again, the worrying thing with Semin is his age. Rostov to me at the minute kind of need a bit of a stability period with a young manager who's willing to, integrate fresher players and rebuild. I mean, is Semin going to stick around for 3 years to do that? Or are you going to be looking for another given his age, or are you going to be looking for another new manager down the line in a year or two's time? So it's a really interesting period for Rostov, and I must admit I'm not massively convinced at this point. I'm surprised Semin wants to go through this. It's at nearly 75. I want to be happily retired, but it really just seems like to some football management is just an addiction. They just can't let it go. But yeah, it's a surprising appointment to me. I mean, it is, like David said, very typically Rostov, but I've got reservations about it, let's just say, with Semin. But we will have to wait and see. You know, he came back for his 4th spell at Loco and won the league and shocked everybody. So you just never know. But I've got some reservations about that. I'm more excited, like David, about the and like yourself probably as well, about the Karpin appointment for Sbornaya. More fascinated and intrigued, let's just say.
Yeah, certainly. It's ironic that you mentioned there about managers being unable to really give up the game and get away from that addiction. Literally, back end of last season, we discussed former Zenit UEFA Cup winning manager Dick Advocaat finally retiring for the 5th time, only to then be announced as Iraq manager literally a couple of weeks ago. Like,
seriously,
yeah, he's going into international management now, so not quite as.
Van Gaal's come out of retirement to coach the Netherlands as well, hasn't he?
Yeah, it'll keep happening. So it's no surprise that
they can't let it go.
It's no surprise that Semin at 75 cannot give up the game yet, and he feels like he's got some unfinished business somewhere. But that is the end of this week's RFN podcast. This week we have also had a few big RPL-related moves in the transfer window. Lokomotiv are continuing, or maybe starting off, what could be a bizarre fire sale. Grzegorz Krakowiak has joined Krasnodar for 1.5 million euros, while Naye Tikhnisian has moved from Siska to Logo for 5 million euros. And the aforementioned Denis Makarov, of course, left Rubin for Dinamo for 10 million euros, according to reports. In Serie A, former Rostov striker Eldor Shomorodov has left Genoa to join Jose Mourinho's AS Roma for what will be potentially 20 million euros after bonuses. It's reported that Rostov themselves should get 1.5 million of that in sell-on clauses, which is any little boost is good for them to add to the squad. But unfortunately, Spartak have just came out of their match against Benfica at the Otkritia and lost 2-0 at home in the first leg of their Champions League qualifier, which is, barring a miracle in the Estadio da Luz, probably the end of their Champions League hopes for now. They do, of course, I believe, drop into the Europa League qualifiers, just as Russian teams have in the past, dropping out at this level in the qualification stage. And we'll cover more about Spartak's European games and maybe some more of the Moscow-based clubs where we've tried to stay away from this week. Next up, in the next edition of the Russian Football News Podcast. Goodbye for now.
Идет футбольный матч, летит над полем мяч. Веди его, беги, точнее его ударь. Но мяч берет ноги решительный вратарь. Не напрасно футбольное поле самых ловких и смелых влечет. Здесь нужны тренировка и воля, быстрота, увлечение, расчет.